Folks, I want to ask you something. What does it take? What does it take for a Democrat to look the American people in the eye and say, you know what? Maybe we should make sure only citizens are voting in our elections. Apparently, more than a software error that quietly handed 6,600 foreign nationals the ability to vote in New Jersey. Apparently, more than federal prosecutors this month filing charges against actual foreign nationals, real people, not American citizens, who voted in the last 3 elections in New Jersey. Now, you would think that this is the kind of thing where everybody gets in a room and says, all right, we've got a problem. Let's fix it. Bipartisan, easy, done. The American people go home happy. You'd think that. Instead, and I have this story right here in my formerly nicotine-stained fingers, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, a man who has dedicated his life to the performance of caring very deeply about things, went before the cameras and explained that the SAVE Act, the bill that would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, would not have prevented the New Jersey error. Cory, my friend. That is like your house burning down, and when the fire department shows up with a hose, you say, well, technically, that particular hose wouldn't have prevented this fire. Okay, fine, maybe you're right. But your house is still on fire, pal, and right now, across this fruited plain, the American voter's house is on fire, and the Democrats are standing on the lawn, telling us why the hose won't work. I'm Rick LeBow. This is Rush Hour. And we are just getting started. My friends, welcome! Welcome to the Rush Hour, the Excellence in Podcasting Network's flagship operation, coming to you live and in living color on the golden EIP microphone from the Attila the Hun chair here at the Rush Hour Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies. It is Friday, August the 1st, 2026, and I am your host, America's truth detector, serving humanity simply by showing up, talent on loan from God. And today we are going to spend some time on what I believe is one of the most important and most deliberately ignored issues in American political life. Not immigration, exactly, not crime, exactly, but the thing that ties them together and makes them possible in the long run. The vote. Who has it? Who's using it? And who in Washington, D.C. is working very hard to make sure you can never be entirely certain the answer is only American citizens. So let's lay this out properly, because the drive-by media is going to rush past this like a cab driver with a fare to catch. The state of New Jersey, governed, for those keeping score at home, by Democrats, discovered this month that a software error in their voter registration system had made roughly 6,600 non-citizens eligible to vote. Not 66, not 660, 6,600. And it wasn't discovered through some heroic act of oversight by the people running the system. It surfaced, the way these things always surface, eventually with a thud. And then, because this is America in 2026, and we now have federal law enforcement that has apparently rediscovered its purpose, the Department of Homeland Security stepped in. Breitbart is reporting, exclusively, that feds have now charged several foreign nationals for actually voting, not registering, voting, in the last 3 elections. Now, think about what that means. 3 elections. These weren't tourists who wandered into a polling place by accident. 3 election cycles. These people voted in federal elections, voted for your senators, voted for your congressmen, and perhaps, depending on how you do the math and how many there were across how many districts, maybe moved a needle or two. We don't know the full scope yet, but we know it happened. And here is where it gets rich, really rich, because the response from the Democratic Party has been a clinic, an absolute masterclass in changing the subject. Senator Cory Booker, Senator New Jersey himself, was asked about the SAVE Act. Now, the SAVE Act is simple. It requires proof of citizenship when you register to vote. That is the bill. That is what it does. Very simple stuff. Bread and butter American common sense. And Booker looked into the camera and said, well, the SAVE Act would not have prevented this specific New Jersey error. Do you see what he did there? He took the specific mechanism of one specific scandal and used it to argue against the general principle of knowing whether voters are citizens. That is a rhetorical trick so old that Aristotle probably wrote a chapter about it. But Cory Booker says it with such earnest conviction, such sincere head-tilting concern, that you'd think he just solved a calculus problem. The SAVE Act doesn't have to have prevented this scandal to be worth passing. The whole point is that we should not have to rely on a software error being discovered after the fact to find out that thousands of non-citizens got onto the rolls. We should have a front-end check. We should require proof of citizenship. Full stop. Done, period. But you know why Cory Booker doesn't want that. And I want you to really hear me on this, because I know some of you are saying, come on, Rick, not everything is a conspiracy. I'm not saying conspiracy. I'm saying incentive. The Democratic Party has built its entire modern electoral coalition on the premise that the bigger the pool of voters, the better their odds. The more chaotic the voter rolls, the harder it is to audit. The harder it is to audit, the easier it is to let things slide. The easier it is to let things slide, the more certain blocks of voters end up tilting their way. This is not a conspiracy. This is math. This is a political incentive structure that a freshman poli-sci student could diagram on a napkin. They need the chaos. The chaos is the point. And here's where I want to bring in another thread, because this story connects to something else going on this week. Democrats in the Senate are blocking the SAVE Act, blocking it. And as they do, President Trump has apparently told John Thune, that's the majority leader for those of you in Rio Linda, to either nuke the filibuster or cancel the August recess until this thing passes. Now, here is the part that will absolutely curl your hair. Democrats, when pressed this week on whether they would eliminate the filibuster, were asked directly, when would you get rid of it? And several of them essentially said, on camera, they'd kill it in a heartbeat if they had the majority and the right agenda item in front of them. So let me translate. The filibuster is a sacred institution of American democracy that must never be touched, right up until the moment the Democrats want to touch it. Then it's a procedural relic standing in the way of progress. You know, I've watched these people for decades, and the consistency of the inconsistency, it never stops impressing me. It truly never does. Now, I want to say something about the Electoral College, because Kamala Harris surfaced this week. Yes, she's back. She appeared at the National Urban League Conference, and she came out in favor of expanding the Supreme Court and abolishing the Electoral College. Because apparently, the lesson Kamala took from losing in 2024 was not improve as a candidate, but rather change the rules so candidates like me can win. She's mulling a 2028 run, we're told. Let me think about this for a second. The woman who lost to Donald Trump in one of the more lopsided electoral thumps in recent memory, and I say this without any particular delight, it's just the scoreboard, is now proposing to abolish the system by which she lost. Now, I want you to imagine, just for a moment, if after 2000, George W. Bush had stood up and said, you know what, the popular vote thing, we should probably get rid of that. The drive-by media would have needed a fainting couch for a week. But when Kamala does it, it's called democracy reform. They put it in a nice suit and call it reform. Here's what abolishing the Electoral College actually means for those playing along at home. It means New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and a handful of other enormous population centers decide every presidential election. Done. Full stop. If you live in Wyoming, you don't matter. If you live in Nebraska or Iowa or Montana, you are scenery. You are a flyover state in every sense, not just geographically. The founders, and I know the left gets uncomfortable when you invoke the founders, as if they were just a bunch of old dead white guys with no insights worth preserving. The founders built the Electoral College precisely because they understood that raw majority rule, without structural protections for different communities and different interests, is just mob rule with better branding. The United States is not a pure democracy. It is a constitutional republic, and thank God for that. Thank God every single day. Kamala Harris wants to scrap that system because it produced a result she didn't like. That's it. That is the entire intellectual foundation of this proposal. And the drive-by media is covering it like it's a reasonable policy discussion rather than what it actually is. A candidate auditioning for her base by promising to tear down the walls of the House if she can't win the key. The Democrats know, they know that their ideas do not command majority support in the places and among the people that America's constitutional structure was designed to protect. So they want to change the structure. When you can't win the game, change the rules. When you can't change the rules, find a judge. When you can't find a judge, pack the court. And that is exactly what she's proposing on the Supreme Court, too. Pack it, expand it, add justices until you get the rulings you want. This is not a constitutional argument. This is a tantrum dressed in legislative language. My friends, every last one of these proposals, killing the Electoral College, packing the court, blocking the SAVE Act, fighting voter integrity tooth and nail, every single one points in the same direction. They are terrified of a fair fight. They have to be, because when they run on their actual ideas, when they actually have to defend open borders and court packing and abolishing the system that gives Wyoming and Montana a voice, they lose. They lose, and they know it. And that is why they are going after the architecture of the election itself, rather than trying to earn your vote. Don't doubt me on this one. Let's hit the roundup, folks, because there is no shortage of material today. Not even close. The news this week has been firing on all cylinders, and I want to make sure we cover it all. So rapid fire, here we go. First up, J.D. Vance. Now, I know the neocons can't stand him, and honestly, the burning hatred of the neocon establishment for J.D. Vance is its own kind of recommendation. But Vance showed up at a cabinet meeting this week and dropped a number that I want you to sit with for just a moment. The task force to eliminate fraud, which Vance chairs, has identified $230 billion in fraud across government programs. And of that, they have actually stopped, blocked, prevented, halted $56 billion in fraudulent payments. $56 billion. That is real money. I know in Washington, D.C., where they talk about trillions like the rest of us talk about what we spent at the grocery store, 56 billion sounds like a rounding error. But out here in the real world, that is $56 billion that was headed straight out of your pocket and into someone else's hand under entirely fraudulent pretenses. Gone. Stopped. And then, because this is America in 2026 and we have apparently entered the golden age of creative criminality, you pair that with the story on fraudfluencers. Yes, that is apparently a word now. And yes, we have arrived at a moment in American cultural history where social media influencers are recruiting people into government fraud schemes, which the Department of Labor's Inspector General had to come out and publicly warn about this week. People on social media walking you through step by step how to defraud Medicaid, how to file false claims, how to essentially pick the pocket of every single American taxpayer while filming it for views. And there are apparently enough of them doing this that the Inspector General of the United States Department of Labor had to issue a national warning. I want to also note that separately, prosecutors are going after an ABA therapy fraud scheme, applied behavior analysis therapy for autism, where Medicaid paid over $5 billion between 2018 and 2024, and a chunk of that was apparently fraudulent. Tens of millions in schemes being prosecuted right now. $5 billion in one therapy category alone. Now, I am not suggesting that everyone in that space is a fraudster, but I will say this. When the government writes a blank check and doesn't watch where it goes, people will find a way to cash it. This is not a radical conservative insight. This is basic human nature. This is what happens every single time you build a massive government program with a river of money flowing through it and a trickle of oversight watching it. The fraud is the system. The fraud is baked in. And the only reason we're even finding it now is because, for the first time in a long time, someone in Washington is actually looking. $56 billion stopped. Good work, JD. Second story, and this one I find purely, endlessly entertaining. James Carville, the ragin' Cajun himself, back on television, fresh as a swamp breeze, telling the audience on MSNBC's The Beat, which I'm sure has a viewership that would fit comfortably into a mid-sized school gymnasium, that President Trump is, quote, a washed-up fat old man. Now, James Carville. This is the man who helped elect Bill Clinton in 1992. A man who has, shall we say, not himself entirely aged into the silhouette of a Greek statue. A man whose own party just spent the last 4 years insisting that questioning someone's mental acuity or physical fitness was an act of unspeakable cruelty. You'll remember when they told us that anyone asking if Joe Biden was cognitively fit for office was engaged in elder abuse. But Trump? Oh, Trump you can call fat and washed up. That's just political commentary. That's just James being James. I love these people. I truly love them. Here's the thing, though. The left has been saying Trump is done, washed up, finished, irrelevant, a chapter closed, since about 2016. And every single time they say it, he is somehow still there, still driving the conversation, still making their heads explode in real time on cable television. If this man is washed up, I shudder to think what relevant looks like. Carville also said, and I want to be fair here, that he doesn't think Trump matters that much anymore. Right, which is why James Carville is spending his Friday nights on MSNBC talking about him. He doesn't matter. He doesn't matter at all. Sure, James, sure. And third, this one is a little closer to home, I think. The situation in Ceuta. Now, Ceuta is a Spanish enclave on the northern tip of Africa. It's a little sliver of Spain sitting right on the Moroccan coast, basically the gateway from Africa into Europe. And this week, there is a full-on migrant crisis happening there. A wave of illegal crossings, a border emergency in an enclave that was never designed to handle it. And here is where it gets diplomatically spicy. Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, a man who does not pull punches, which is probably why they gave him the job, criticized Spain for its handling of the border crisis. Spain's response? The transport minister went online and essentially blamed Israel for the Ceuta crisis. Now, Spain. This is the same Spanish government that has been one of the loudest voices in Western Europe against Israel. So the pattern here is open your borders, refuse to control immigration, have a crisis, and then when someone foreign points it out, blame the Jews. Classic misdirection. Ancient script, new staging. But here is what I actually want you to take from the Ceuta story, because it does apply to us directly. What you are watching in Ceuta is a preview. It is a snapshot of what happens when a nation decides that controlling its border is either impossible, immoral, or both. You get a crisis. And once the crisis starts, it is extraordinarily hard to stop because the people crossing are not stopping, and the political will to stop them is constantly being undermined by people who insist that enforcement is cruelty. The Federalist put it bluntly. This is what Democrats will do with America's border the next time they get power. We are one election cycle away from undoing everything that's been rebuilt on our southern border. One election, and the people who would undo it are not hiding what they plan to do. They're on stage at the National Urban League Conference saying it out loud. Pay attention to Ceuta. That is a mirror. My friends, we are winding down today on the rush hour. Let me leave you with this, because I think it ties the whole show together in a way that is worth sitting with on a Friday afternoon. Everything we talked about today is really the same conversation. Voter rolls with non-citizens on them, a former vice president proposing to abolish the system that makes your vote in a smaller state worth casting, Democrats blocking the most basic imaginable election integrity measure, $230 billion in government fraud identified in the programs your taxes fund, social media accounts teaching people how to loot the Treasury for views and likes. What all of it points to is a simple thing. The institutions and the rules that were built to protect the ordinary American, the citizen, the taxpayer, the voter, have been under sustained pressure for a long time. And the people applying that pressure are not doing it out of confusion. They are not misguided. They know exactly what they're doing. They are trying to make the system big enough and complicated enough and chaotic enough that it cannot be audited, cannot be cleaned up, cannot be held to account. Because in a system that can't be held to account, the people closest to the levers of power win. And the ordinary American, sitting in his car right now on his way home from a job he actually has to show up for, he loses. The good news, and there is good news today, is that $56 billion was stopped. Federal charges are being filed. The SAVE Act is being fought for. The fight is happening. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. And it happened because in 2024, the American people, the actual citizens, went to the polls in sufficient numbers that even the chaos couldn't contain them. They voted, and it counted. Make sure it keeps counting. Do not get complacent. Do not assume it's handled. These things are never fully handled. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And brother, the meter is running. Have a great weekend. God bless you. God bless America. I'm Rick LeBeau. This has been Rush Hour. Same time tomorrow, if they let us back on.